we're seeing development in cities that's happening every single day. We're not seeing it happening in the county. So the question I have is, why is that happening?
Mr. Durst, thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
So you are running for Ada County Commissioner. There are a lot of people running. Why do it? I mean, it's just, you're one of the last interviews I've done. I still have to meet with Clyde, which is going to be great. I've actually met with him before, but talking to everybody, it's like, God, man, a bucket of problems. Like there's a lot here. So what's your motivation for running?
Well, I think the top motivation I have for running is that I believe that the way Ada County goes, this is the way that the state of Idaho is going to go. And I know that you're a refugee from another state.
Yes, sir.
I don't want to have to be a refugee to another state. I want Idaho to stay conservative, and we see that what happened in Oregon and Washington, Colorado, where their most populous counties became pretty liberal, and the rest of the state followed suit. I don't want that happening in Ada County. And now we have a mayor in Boise who's basically unabated in what she's trying to do. Our county commissioner certainly isn't standing up to her. And so my main motivation for running here is to keep Ada County conservative, so the state of Idaho stays conservative, so we have a place to raise our kids.
Okay. There's a lot there.
Yep.
Let's start unpacking it. How does a county commissioner keep Ada County conservative?
Well, I think the first thing we have to look at is land use planning.
Okay.
I mean, my background's in public policy. I've got a degree in that and a master's degree in that.
Get this microphone just a little bit closer if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect,
Better.
perfect,
Okay.
perfect.
So my background's I have a master's degree in public policy and administration, and part of the research that I did during my graduate studies is looking at the way that different types of land use has an impact on voting trends, for example. So we know that high density housing tends to precede and result in more Democratic votes. So if you think about the role of the county commissioner and their ability to impact the comprehensive plan for the county, having more development that supports single family housing will have a direct impact on making sure that more family-oriented development happens and increase the number of Republican voters who hopefully will be conservative and be able to support that sort of lifestyle and that sort of value within the community. So there's a direct impact between what the county commission does and that sort of long-term societal impact at the partisan and ideological level.
I'm not aware of any high-density unincorporated Ada County developments.
Correct.
Like we're sitting in one we're sitting in an unincorporated Ada County development right now.
Right.
This is not high density.
Right.
This is like the opposite. So like, is this something that you see? Like, am I missing something? Is this actually happening, or is that
no? There's two pieces to this, right? There's the status quo. I also live in unincorporated Ada County.
Great.
Right.
There you go.
So that's largely R4 is the housing is the land use designation for most of that.
Right. Everybody's got a quarter acre, something like that. Yeah.
Right. But the number of those people are less. So if you put in a multi-housing complex, for example, in the city of Meridian or Boise or someplace like that, that's a lot of voters in a small space really fast. So what would we as Ada County Commission have a role to do? Well, we can approve more land development in the county so that we can get more voters into those places and that's not the primary motivation to do it, right? Motivation is we want to make sure that people have a place to live. We want to make sure that we provide them ample housing so they can raise their kids and their families. But right now there's a lack of supply to do that. And so instead of encouraging the development that will precipitate a type of citizen that will think one way, where the cities are instead taking advantage of that and putting in a different kind, I'm saying that if we're more aggressive about how we approve projects in the county, we can then ensue a better opportunity for our more conservative viewpoints.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. It's my understanding that right now the county is not actively disapproving or rejecting, right?
Yeah.
It's my understanding that they're not rejecting. And again, I'm totally open to be educated to this. But when people are like, "Hey, we need to approve more of these things," what the response that I've heard from developers is like, "Yeah, but there's not the money to do it right now." Like developers are developing everywhere it makes sense for developers to develop. And the county, it's my understanding, which I very much like this area, that the government doesn't aggressively get in the way of developers. In other states, it's always the NIMBY, not in my backyard. I don't want further development.
Yeah.
But is there actually a pattern of the county saying, "Hey, we're going to reject these development plans"?
So there's a difference between the structural and the practical impact of these things. So technically, I mean, you're right. On the practical level, they haven't been rejecting the applications that have been coming in. But what are we doing to incentivize the growth? That's or the development. That's the question that I have. So let me, just because you're new to the area, so let me kind of give you a little bit of background on what's been happening for 20 plus years. So when I first got elected to legislature in 2006, I got one of the first meetings I got invited to, because I represented South Boise, was by a developer who wanted to put in a huge development south of the interstate towards Elmore County. And they had everything lined up. And there's, by the way, if you look at the plots on the Ada County Assessor's website, they're already there. Like, they've been there for decades. And for a long time, since the early 2000s, maybe even sooner than that, earlier than that, there was a desire to create an extension off of I-84 from Caldwell and bring it in past the county line into Elmore County. And so to take a southern route down the south part of Ada County and bring it in there. And part of the goal for that was to be able to provide more infrastructure to be able to build housing in places where it hasn't been built yet. And so, and that was the suggestion for that came from a lot of different things, but one of them was, we've been building on the most productive farmland we have in Ada County. That's where the growth has been in the last 20 years, is in the productive farmland. There's nothing south of the interstate. I mean, there's sagebrush and lava rock. That's pretty much all that's there. And so if you look like Orchard Flats or Mayfield or those areas, if we were to be able to say, "Hey, we're going to give you water rights to be able to build out there," because there is water. The water does exist. It's just under 300 feet of lava rock, which my wife and I actually were under contract for a piece of property. I think it was 6 acres we were going to buy. And then we called up Huddleston's, who's a well drilling company. Yeah. And we said, "How much is it going to cost us to drill our well?" And they went out and they looked and they said, "This is going to cost you $80,000 to drill this well." We're like, "Yeah, okay, that's not happening. We can't afford that." As an individual property owner, we couldn't afford to do that. But if you're looking at 1,000 houses, then that makes it much more, you can share those costs over multiple property owners instead of just one and make it available. That's what we're not doing in particular with that area. And if we created those sorts of opportunities, for one, it would reduce the traffic congestion that we see, because they'd be spread into different parts of the county that aren't currently being developed. It would allow us to be able to have, the other thing we need to be looking at is how we use regulation. It is true that we're not super regulated, although Ada County is more regulated than other parts of Idaho. There's places in Idaho where there's virtually zero requirements when it comes to building. Like, you can pretty much just build whatever you want, whenever you want, without asking first, and there's no permitting and everything like that. I'm not suggesting we go that far, but I think we need to be able to say, what can we do to reduce the burden? Because every time when there's a permit, there's a cost, right? The permits aren't free. So anything we can do to green light projects, especially for single family housing, I think we should be doing. And anything we can do to encourage that development in places where we haven't been, so we can get more housing stock, I think that'll improve. And that'll have an impact on, going back to your original question, why am I running for this office? Because I want to make sure that we have the sort of community that I want to raise my kids in.
Yeah, I get that. So you're saying that the incentive to build in a place that's not being built on now would come from giving them water rights?
Well, there's a few things, right? For one, making sure that it's known that these developments, that we've got a plan to make sure that we can do that. So there's something called the WUI, right? This is the Wild Urban Impact Interface, right? That's a huge problem for a lot of that development. That's why it's not happening out there, is because there's these regulations that are keeping them from being able to develop, which is why everybody's coming to the north instead of to the south. It's because of the WUI. That's part of it. If the county
is the WUI an Ada County policy?
It's a federal policy that the county is choosing to abide by in a specific way. It doesn't have to abide by it in those specific ways. It's our county. We get to make a decision as to where we define it as and where it's not. That's what I'm saying. Those sorts of policies could make a difference on the development. There's been a desire, like I said, this goes back 20 plus years. People have wanted to build in this land. They haven't been able to because of these, barriers to entry that have existed. I believe it is the case. Interest rates are high right now. So obviously home ownership is harder to get to. That's true. But developments take years of processes to be able to get done. What I'm saying is if we start greenlighting some of this stuff, especially if we have builders, for example, who have got a track record of building good homes that are, pass inspection, do all those sorts of things, we should just let them do it. Let them do what they do instead of standing in their way. Because I believe if we unlock the power of the free market, we'll start to see those things. We'll see prices come down, and as prices come down, homeownership will become more available to people, and they'll stop living in apartments. They'll start living in houses and start taking care of their community.
Yeah. First, I absolutely agree that when you shift from renting towards ownership, you have a more conservative populace. That's a very well understood.
And Bowling Alone. Look at the book, Bowling Alone. Have you read that before?
Bullying Alone?
Bowling Alone.
Bowling. No, I haven't.
It's a book by a guy named Robert Putnam, and it was this really great book. It came out in the late 2000s, early mid 2000s, and fantastic book talking about this very thing, that home ownership is a precursor to an invested community, to voting, to any number of things that you would look at as positive outcomes within a community. That is the key, is that sort of involvement with your communities. When you start owning a home and you start caring, crime rates go down, social service use goes down, like all these things, because people they care and they.
Oh yeah, look, you don't have to convince me.
Yeah.
Again, I very much agree with you that you have a lot of benefits come from when you have home ownership, and especially renting versus buying. You're going to see a distinction in influxes of transients and whatever it might be.
Right.
So your feeling is overwhelmingly you're saying, hey, look, one thing that you feel you could do is green light projects, even though you don't necessarily know that we have been red lighting them. You feel green lighting more of them or doing what you can to incentivize or reinterpret federal regulations could lead to a greater desire to develop in a specific area that's largely been untapped.
Well, I think it's, like I said, it's a multifaceted piece, right? There's the regulatory piece, there's the infrastructure piece. How are we providing that? If we say, look, we're going to make sure that there's all the infrastructural needs are taken care of in this community to incentivize growth, that helps, right? The county has a place.
Wouldn't ACHD be in charge of getting those transportation routes?
On the transportation side, that's true. We're talking about broadband. We're talking about utilities. Infrastructure is more than just roads, right?
No, for sure. You had brought up the southernmost connection from Colton.
Well, that would ultimately be an ITD issue because it's a federal highway, right? So that's gotcha. Not even ACHD, but the role that we play. So Compass, which is the regional board that manages all the land use, that's where a lot of those discussions take place. And we're not even having the discussion, right? Like, we're seeing development in cities that's happening every single day. We're not seeing it happening in the county. So the question I have is, why is that happening? Do people want to be living in such close proximity to each other? I don't think so. I tell people where I live on a 5-acre lot. My dogs bark at night. People don't care. Like, I tell people that, they're like, oh my gosh, I'd love to live someplace like that. I'm like, yeah, a lot of people would prefer to live on a 1/4-acre lot or a 1/2-acre lot. That's where they'd prefer to be. So it's not that people are choosing this other stuff because it's their preference. It's choosing against what's available.
Well, okay. Let's break. So you're saying that people are choosing to live in the center of the city, not because it's preferable, but because it's the only thing they can afford. Or it's the only thing available to them.
I don't think that's the only reason, but I think that's a large explanation for it.
Here's a question for you. Again, I mentioned to you, Sean Digert came in recently, and he was talking about living where he lives, which is much more rural and nice. And we were having a conversation, and again, he's running for legislature.
Right.
And we were having a discussion about emergency response times, because that is a big problem in some of the more rural areas where he's by. So I think it's pretty clear, wouldn't you agree, that the closer you live to the hub of a city, you're going to have greater access to, grocery stores more quickly. You're going to have greater access to for instance, take Eagle, for example, a little bit of an older population, right? And they want greater access to, say, hospitals, right? They don't want to be 20 minutes away from a hospital. They want to be 5 minutes away or 10 minutes away, or they don't want to. My dad moved here recently, and he likes to ride his bike around. Well, if he's living, 20 minutes away on 5 acres, that might be nice, but he can't ride his bike around town, things like that. So I think there is, do you think there's a fair argument for saying there is a population of people that actually do prefer to be much more in a city that can take advantage of the city services, city clubs, city parks, things of that nature?
Sure. I mean, there are people that this goes back to fights that we've been having in Ada County for 30, 40 years, right? As communities have become annexed in by the cities, people who largely didn't want to be annexed in by the cities being forced to do that. I mean, that's where we've got a lot of the legislative proposals that have come back around forced annexation, because it was happening a lot in the 80s and the 90s. There was a county commissioner named Vern Bisterfeld here in Ada County.
What was his name?
Vern Bisterfeld. The public safety
Bisterfeld.
The public safety building is named after him.
Wow,
actually,
that's awesome.
And he had it named after him before he died. And he got annexed into the city of Boise, and his comment was, "You guys just annexed me, and you're going to get me on your city council now." And it's the same kind of mentality. Like, yes, there are people that prefer to be city dwellers. That is true.
Sure.
I mean, that is a fact, right? But there are a lot of people who just see that as the only real option to them. We look at the sort of planned developments we've seen at Avamore, for example, or we see here at even where you're at, and they're being approved throughout in different places in the state, not just in Ada County, but we look at different places in the state. Canyon County. If you look in Canyon County, a lot of the development that's happening there is happening in unincorporated Canyon County. It's not happening in the cities. So my question is, why is it happening there and it's not happening here in Ada County? Well, I think there's structural reasons for that. There's an unwillingness. When we have our conversations in Compass, we're not pushing back saying, no, we want to build in the county, right? There's this desire to to increase density. I don't support density. I mean, I'll be unequivocal about that. I do not support the upzone ordinance that the city of Boise passed. I think it's the exact opposite direction that we should be going as a county. We need to counteract it with more low density housing throughout the county. And to the extent that we can do that and we can encourage that, I think we absolutely should. There's ways that we can do that. We can use the land use planning requirements. We can use the regulatory climate. We can do all of those things to encourage the development, because if those things are a better option for a builder, they're going to build, right? The land is cheaper in the county than it is in the city, right? Because of its location. So if you can buy, let's say, 100 acres in the county for, probably at this point, it's probably $10,000 an acre. That's considerably cheaper than the $150,000 to $300,000 you're paying per acre when you get close to town. So the numbers still work out. You still have your margin for your builder, and we're starting to develop more, so they don't have to build as many houses. Because that's why they have to build so many houses here, is because they have to make up for the land value. They have to be able to build something. They have to have volume to be able to justify the expense of the acquisition of the land.
Gotcha. Okay. So again, bottom line is, especially from a development standpoint, you think there needs to be more unincorporated development. There needs to be greater incentives so that we can have more housing, take the pressure off the housing crunch. Yes, interest rates are high, but that doesn't mean prices have to jump up as well to match that, which is, obviously counter to what actually should be happening.
Well, you look at it, right? I mean, your homeowner, right? You buy a house, your mortgage is depending upon how much of a loan you can get, right? Which is largely dependent upon your interest rate. Well, if you can buy a house for $100,000 less than you're going to be able to buy it for, then even if the interest rates are 4.5 points higher than they were before, that mortgage rate is still in a level where you can still make it work, which makes home ownership possible. And so when interest rates finally decline, you can refinance and you've got a house that's not underwater and you can build to afford it. So.
Yeah, look, it's a complex equation, right?
Yep.
Because you got to take it into, but I very much enjoy real estate. And I was actually telling people that the real estate market, even though interest rates have gone up considerably in the last 2 years, the real estate market has actually increased in strength considerably, because even though we went from like a 3% to a 7% mortgage, we actually only dropped about 5 to 10% max throughout the various areas. So
right.
It's like, okay, but if you were going to drop down proportionate to the actual payment on your mortgage,
right? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. You would have had to drop your price down like from 900,000 to like 400,000 or 500,000 or whatever, 500,000 to 300,000 to compensate for the increase in price. So yeah, look, I was telling everybody I knew, like, my housing market is getting stronger, and they're like, yeah, but prices came down. I'm like, but it didn't come down as much as they theoretically should have.
Relatively. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a cool thing. Okay. So more housing. I love more housing. God bless America. Let's get, rooftops and big families. What about the jail system? Okay. Talk to me about the bond, the funding of the jail system. Obviously there was a jail bond that failed to pass. It was very, very slim margin. But talk to me about that. What do you think? Do we fund more of the sheriff's department and the jail system or not?
So I think that first of all, the voters spoke. They didn't support a bond. I don't think we should put that in front of them again. That's my number one statement on that. I do think we need to be able to support to the extent that we need more changes to our jail. We should fund them as we go. Budgets are about priorities. And to the extent that that's a priority, then we need to make it a priority in our budget. One of the things that I look at too is the way that we use our alternative sentencing program to mitigate the need for jail space. And I think that we've done a decent job at that so far, but we could be doing a much better job.
How do you mean specifically? I've spoken with, and the reason I ask is because I've spoken with Sheriff Clifford quite a few times about the alternate ways that they keep people out of the jail while still serving sentences. They have, kind of transit bridge houses. They have, weekend jail, which I didn't even know was a thing, but you can go to your work and then come back and serve Saturday and Sunday in jail, all kinds of things. So what are the other programs that you feel could be better utilized?
So back in the 2010s, there was an organization, a for-profit company that was trying to provide this sort of transition housing, that sort of thing. The way I look at it is that we rely far too much. Here's the problem. Let me step back. The problem with the jail proposal was that it was A, taking on debt, which I don't think is a good idea, and B, it was assuming that the government in that jail was the only place we could house people. And that was really the nexus of the decision. We need more beds because this is what our job is. We need to create this space. And I just don't think that's true. For violent offenders, absolutely we need to put them in a jail where there's lots of guards. I think everybody acknowledges that's where they need to be. But a lot of perpetrators, a lot of folks aren't in that position, right? They're not flight risks. They're not threats to society. They did something stupid. Maybe they got a DUI. Maybe they got, petty theft or something like that. And they got charged with a misdemeanor, has 30-day jail sentence. Okay, well, is there a place we can put them someplace else to be able to mitigate those things? And so, yeah, we are doing some alternative sentencing right now. That's a good thing. We should continue to do some alternative sentencing. We should increase the number of options we have for those things through the rider program or through transitional housing for people that are going through those sorts of things where instead of having, the cost, I think this number is going to be old because I haven't looked at it recently, but it used to be like $50,000 a year to house an inmate, right? Well, if you have somebody that's in a multifamily location that's in transition housing, you can do that for $5,000 a year, $8,000 a year. So the cost to the taxpayer is much less. And the impact's still the same, right? We're still providing the sort of kind of restorative justice that we need to have to make sure that people don't, there's not to reduce our recidivism rates, but we also aren't just putting all of our eggs into this one basket. And I think, I acknowledge that we are doing things too. And I think that Sheriff Clifford is absolutely right about that. But what I'm arguing is that we need to look at other ideas too to try to increase those options and maybe look at to our nonprofit and for-profit organizations to see what they might be willing to be able to provide as a service that can do it at a lower cost and provide what we need as a community to keep our community safe.
Man, but the for-profit jail system.
Well, CCA,
that's tricky.
Well, we're not talking about jails, right? I would
working in conjunction with jails, people that you can't house in the actual county jail.
Right. So, well, CCA, I mean, we had CCA for a long time here in the state of Idaho. And that was a huge problem, right? There were several federal lawsuits that came as a result of that. But I don't think that private enterprise is our enemy. Like, I just don't. I think that if we have the proper safeguards in place, for-profit organizations, nonprofit organizations can provide a service to our community, do it for less money, and to be able to do just as good of a job. As long as we know what our benchmarks are, what the expectations are, and we keep a good keep the oversight over those processes, I think we can do those things just fine.
Yeah, but please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying as a principle, for-profit enterprises are an enemy. That's not. I mean, obviously, I've been an entrepreneur my entire adult life. I've never had a job, right? Like I don't even have a resume. I don't know what it would look like. I don't know how to fill one out. I don't know how to structure it. I am absolutely for people be entrepreneurs and creating for-profit enterprises by adding value to communities. What I'm saying is there are some types of for-profit enterprises that do end in federal lawsuits and, manipulation of legal systems and stuff like that are detrimental. That's all I'm saying.
And I think that's true. I think
So you would agree that we're not saying for-profit enterprises are the enemy.
No.
It's that using a for-profit model in certain circumstances with community-based requirements can lead to problems.
Tautologically, that's true, right? Like,
well,
bad actors can do bad things, right?
Right.
I mean, that's tautologically accurate. But I think what I'm saying is within these limited circumstances, because we're talking about on the margins. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about jail space, right? We're not talking about adding 10,000 beds.
Well, they're also talking about things that are unrelated to beds, like the kitchen that's running,
and those
that's
things
rated for like 1,000 meals a day, and it's doing
right. And those things need to be improved. Those are the sorts of things through budgetary prioritization we can fix.
Right. Okay. So you're not against. So it sounds like you're not against improving or spending money or allocating the budget portions of the budget to the jail system. You just also think that there could be efficiencies elsewhere.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay, we're getting there. We're just like, okay, awesome.
That's my view on a lot of this stuff with county government, is that if the community decides they want to spend money on it, that's fine. But is there a better way to spend the money? I mean, that's my worldview. I don't think the government typically does a good job at things. I think that typically government spends more money than it needs to do things. And so to the extent that we identify something, because the first question I always ask is this a proper role of government? Obviously, the jail system, criminal justice is clear. You'd be hard pressed to argue that would be say that's not the case, right? But there are things that we do in county government that maybe are certainly on the outskirts of that proper role of government. And if we decide as a community we want to continue to do them, can we do them more efficiently, or can we have a nonprofit or a faith-based group provide those services that, by the way, do a better job, cost less money? And then the savings we have from that can either go back to the taxpayer, which should be the first priority, or we can send them to other programs that we identify as true needs within the proper role of government, like our jail space, to be able to fix those things up so that we don't have to take on debt to be able to do them otherwise. Okay.
You're leaving it just the elephant in the room. What are those things? What are the things?
Social services, right? Like we'll look at the psychiatric hospital we have here. We have to do that, right? That's something that certainly there's a public safety issue to that we need to keep in mind. How do we better do that? How do we deal with our homeless population in the county? Like it's largely centered in the cities, but those have externality impacts throughout the county when those things happen. How do we provide those? How are we better with those? You look at things like...
I'm sorry. I need to be more clear on my question, if you don't mind. What you were saying, there are things on the fringe of the role of the government, of the county government. Mm-hmm. What are those things that we're doing that are on the fringe of the
well, that's what I'm talking about. Social services, right? Helping homeless people, for example. That's an example. We had the FACES program, which the county just left.
Okay.
That program. That's an example of something that was on the fringe. A lot of the stuff that isn't defined within the county charter is something we're supposed to do. Like that's the stuff that's on the fringe. There's a lot of things like that exist. We spend 60% of our budget on public safety, which is the proper role of government. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Sure.
I think we all know that. But there are other things that are outside of that. The social services that we provide. You know, we cut a program for seniors. Well, was that because we could say, well, maybe that wasn't the proper role of government, but was there a way for us to continue to provide that service, but not have it be provided through the county? Was there ways for us to be able to provide grants to organizations? So one of the things that I'm really interested in doing, if you think back to the 1980s under President Reagan, the way that he dealt with the federal programs that we had, he used community block grants pretty regularly. And that was a really new thing because typically, you know, the government didn't do it that way. My argument is we should be using community block grants and that sort of approach to a lot of these things that aren't core services of the county.
Can you explain a community block grant?
Yeah, so it's where we just basically create a pool of funds or corpus of funds, and we say that are earmarked for a specific purpose, and then we grant off of that corpus to provide the service that's been earmarked for. And so
where do the funds come from?
They come from the county budget.
Okay, so the county still, so if you're like, hey, look, we're going to do a community block grant for this social service program, the community or the county's still paying for that.
Yes, but instead of, let's say that program, when the county runs it, is $1 million, right? For whatever it is.
Sure, whatever.
And now we're going to say, but we're going to only provide a community block grant of $750,000. Well, we just saved a quarter of our costs, right? We have to build in some contingency and some grant administration, which is different. It's a different skill set that we need to be hiring for. But then we get rid of all the other overhead that we've got. So that saves money. We no longer have, there's less public employees who come with retirement requirements and all these other things that are expensive. And we give it to, we take in grantee organizations like nonprofits. So think about the Boise Rescue Mission, for example. And we say, here, no strings attached. Here's the outcomes we want. We need you to be able to show us that you got there. Do what you do.
Do what you do. I don't know what you do, but do it.
Well, I mean, like we see these organizations, they've got track records a lot of times. They show like this is the amount of money we raised from private donors or through philanthropy or whatever, and these are the outcomes we've had.
Gotcha.
Well, look, here's the example I'd like to bring up. State of California spent $10 billion.
Let's not talk about California, because here's my issue with California. People leverage the poor management of California to gain notoriety and favor in this state. And the problems we have in this state are different than the problems in California. The culture is different. Yeah. So if we start looking at like I could rattle off 1,000 things that you would never know about because I actually lived there. Yeah. And I could sound great because I'm like, we're not going to do this. And I'd get through all 1,000 and I'd be like, see, that's why I'm a genius, because we're going to avoid making these mistakes that we all know are terrible.
It's not even about that. It's about identifying that government spending doesn't result. When government does the thing, it doesn't typically result in a better outcome. That's the point.
But we don't have to go into another state. If we have examples of Ada County mismanaging programs, let's talk about that, right? Like, for instance, you're saying, hey, look, the county shouldn't be in homeless.
It's not even about mismanagement.
Okay.
It's about, can we do it better?
Okay, great. So let's go down that vein, because you were saying, look, the psychiatric services.
Those are great.
Great. Okay, so take that off. So public safety, take that off. Psychiatric services, take that off. So the thing that I heard you say is like, look, homeless people downtown Boise.
Right.
Okay. And right now the county has programs for this that the taxpayer funds. Is that accurate?
To my understanding, that there are things that we participate in as a county within our regional government that we fund. Yes.
Great. And you're feeling that it would be better if we didn't participate in the way that we're participating now, and instead got a pool of money and then was like, hey, who's the best homeless organization you are. Okay, you're great. Here's the money, less than we were spending. Here's the money. Get better results than we're getting for cheaper.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I like that idea. Are there organizations sufficient to get like significant cost savings?
Well, there's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing too, right? Like you can't. I look at this. I know you don't like school choice, from what I understand from one of the interviews I heard you speak.
I don't think I said I have a position on school choice. I know both sides of it.
Okay. Well, anyway,
there's no right answer. That's my problem.
The thing is, so like, look at school choice as an example. I'm a huge supporter of school choice. Part of the problem is, even if we had the money, the capacity isn't there today. Why isn't the capacity there? Because we don't have the money. Organizations fill voids when resources are available, right? Like, there weren't any internet services providers 40 years ago.
Sure.
Because of what money wasn't there for it. Now they exist, right? Like the free market creates the supply, or creates the demand, and then the supply follows. Like that's how the system works. And so there may not be all the best organizations around today, but if there's a intentional effort by the government to say, we're going to get out of this business. Like, our community agrees that this is something that we want to be doing. And I don't have all the specifics. I'm not going to pretend that I do.
No.
But
That would be silly. I'm not asking about that. I'm just trying to understand like what the principle is.
The principle is, to the extent that we can get the government out of things that it's doing, we should.
Gotcha.
And to the extent that we can empower organizations, and I would be the first to acknowledge my preference is to go to faith-based organizations because they have significantly better outcomes. And I recognize from my perspective that if we don't treat the whole person, we're not actually solving the problem. Because a lot of the root cause analysis is lost when we don't do that. I believe we need to be able to empower those organizations so that they can do what they do well and help them grow and serve our community, because we want these things for our community. We want to help our community do better. But we also recognize that if we can reduce our costs, we can also save taxpayer money too. We've got this situation where we continue to see this kind of hill and valley approach with our property taxes in Idaho. In 2006, we increased the sales tax by a penny to be able to buy down property taxes. We did the same thing again in the last 2 legislative sessions. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the reality is the economic cycles are going to change. And as the cyclical nature of our economy goes, consumer spending declines, right? And during downturns, consumer spending goes down. Well, if consumer spending goes down, so does sales tax collections. And if we don't have that money, we can't buy down our property taxes. So what I'm trying to argue is, look, we know this is a reality. The economic cycle exists. It is predictable. We know it's going to happen. We don't always know when, but we know it will, right? We know that downturns do happen. Recessions have to happen. It's part of the system. And so I'd rather be proactive and start to create the structural changes within the government so that we can reduce property taxes on a real basis instead of on this sort of artificial reduction that we have with our sales tax. So we can say government's smaller now, because the way the budgets work in county government and they do in municipal government is they're budget driven, right? That's how we set our mill rates.
Right.
If the size of government is smaller and our budget is lower, then the mill rates will always be lower, even if the sales tax can't be paying it off. And so I'm trying to think proactively and think, 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the road, and how do we really improve the outcomes for our citizens and reduce the total tax burden in the long run? That's my mentality.
Hey, listen, I understand I hear what you're saying. And to your point, I actually heard, I can't remember exactly who a federal representative, so it was like a senator or congressman, reading an article that he was very critical of some of the social programs. And this is me as a younger man reading this article. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I studied language. I really enjoy nuances of arguments. And his argument was, hey, look, we need to absolutely cut all funding to like meal plans, like food stamps, all of these things. I'm like, wow, that's a provocative statement. Like, why is this? And his argument went that, hey, look, when I was a kid, we had food pantries in our church and they were incredible and people would rely on that. And it allowed the community to rally around itself and supply. So if I come to a food pantry and I'm like, hey, I got some extra food, be it cereal, bread, rice, whatever it might be, I can donate. I feel good donating to my church. I walk away. I'm like, I did something good. I'm not, breaking my arm, patting myself on my back, but I feel good about what I've done. I had the capacity for moral action. The person receiving it recognizes that people donated it. There's value there, the whole thing. But when you insert the government into those types of things, this article goes, you rob people of the capacity to engage in moral action and virtuous acts, right? Mm-hmm. You rob me of the capacity to donate to this food pantry because now you're taking my money without me letting
Free agency is gone.
Right. And you can't attribute virtuous action anymore. Like you don't have the capacity to save someone or to help someone if you're being forced to do these things. We eliminate the capacity for people to act in a decent manner. So again, I get what you're saying, but just like, hey, we need to put personal agency back into and the capacity for people to, decently treat each other back into the hands of the populace to whatever degree it's gone. And again, I'm not here saying it's like, it's totally gone or it's always been there, whatever it might be. So speaking of that, what do we do? What do we do with the large community sites like Expo Idaho? Like because that's getting revamped.
It's getting revamped.
There are a lot of things happening. It's talk to me about this.
So Expo Idaho is a strange duck for me because, I've been going to it since I was a kid.
It almost made me spit coffee.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a strange duck. I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's in this beautiful space, right? The location is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
I struggle with this because it's the location is prime. It's prime.
Wait, what are you saying?
It's prime real estate.
Are we talking development? Like,
Yeah.
talk to me. Go. Full
Because
send.
there's places that the county could provide that service that are actually closer to where the people in the county live. That could actually add more value. Like, I understand they've made a decision on what to do with LeBois Park. Great. Like, I understand the horse racing was basically dead. We shot the horse. We built something else. That's fine. That's the decision that's been made. Like, but to me, I think, gosh, is that the best place to have a fairgrounds? Because when I was a kid, going out to Glenwood was like going out to the boonies. Like, you couldn't go much further to the west and see something besides farmland. Well, now Glenwood is basically the middle of the county, and there's development all around it. Like, is having that space occupied in that way adding the most value to the property taxpayer and to the community? I don't know that it is. Like, again, there's places in South Ada County which are accessible by the interstate quite easily that you can't really do anything else with, right? The demand for that property is not as good, but we could put a fairgrounds on it with very little effort, right? That would be, I guess that's really where I struggle, because we're talking about gorgeous land right on the river. Like, is there something we could add more value than just the fair? Like, the fair is awesome. I've been going to it for 40 years, but is there a better place for that? Because we have to recognize our community's changed. The center of population has changed in our community. So I don't know. I struggle with that one.
So wait. Okay, you struggle. And
I think that we need to do a cost assessment. I think we need to do the, this is where my consulting work comes into mind.
Yeah,
I'm thinking it through this way. Like, have we done the cost assessment? Have we done the risk analysis? Have we done the cost analysis around the cost benefit analysis around if we were to move it, where could we move it to that would save the money and be able to, because we're talking about land that's not being taxed too, right? So that's got an impact on individual property taxpayers, because we've got this huge plot of land that we're not using that's off the tax rolls that could be very well put on the tax rolls and give back to the community so that everybody else's property taxes go down. Whereas we've got this other piece of land, maybe south of the interstate, that's virtually vacant and nobody cares about. And okay, let's put it there. It's easier to access, by the way. That doesn't cause traffic problems. That's the other problem. Chinnon's backed up all the friggin' time. Glenwood to Gary is backed up all the time. If you're coming from Hidden Springs or wherever, like, that's a mess. Could we put it someplace else so it doesn't have those sort of impacts, and could put something else there that might be beneficial to the community?
Gotcha. So bottom line is, look, let's put all options on the table.
Yeah.
Let's identify, let's do a real rigorous cost analysis. Let's consider the tax base. Let's consider the obviously capital expense of relocating and building something else, but put it all on the table. And at the very least, at the end of the day, you can say, all right, look, we ran the numbers. The numbers are bad. It's got to stay there, even though it seems whatever. Or
right, the
numbers are great.
Yeah.
This actually works, and we could get something that's more, more appropriately located and recoup some lost tax revenue.
Yep.
It's not a bad idea. Let's just check it out. Just give it a shot. Talk to me about the courthouse.
Okay. The new one.
The new one.
Okay.
The new one. Because a lot of people have been talking about, look, Sharon Ullman was in here last week, and she was talking about, hey, look, we need to be essentially running a 24-hour program there. We need to utilize the space as much as humanly possible before we consider expanding. I've heard other people say, you're never going to get a clerical worker to come to work from midnight to 8 a.m., like, filing papers and doing, court work, whatever. And you're certainly
night court.
Yeah. Well, no, it's more 24-hour schedule. I mean, the night court question, which was brought up by the commissioner, was, specifically that, hey, look, this could be a good idea, 5 to 10 o'clock, kind of like they do in other places. And then again, other people I was chatting with them about, they're like, we don't have enough like crime to be running people 5 to 10. And it's not a style of existence that people here are going to be hot to tolerate, right? I mean, you don't have court reporters that want to be showing up to work at like 8 o'clock at night. And again, I have no idea. I'm an idiot. So what do you think about the need to expand and the issues we're facing there?
I think that largely, I agree that government buildings are underutilized. Like, I think that's true of our schools. I think that's true of our...
Wait, what do you mean of our schools?
Like our schools are vacant for 2.5 months every year.
Oh, I gotcha.
Like that's crazy. Like
There's a program where you could use buses to bus people into like downtown areas at night. I read an article about it a while back. I was like, that's kind of wild, because you have people going to enjoy the nightlife.
Right.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. So government buildings.
So I think so. There's a few things to this. The first is we need to recognize the technological era that we're in. Like the fact that we make people whose jobs don't require them to be in person is kind of crazy to me. Like it's a waste of space. We know that it makes it harder for recruitment. Like I remember I have a couple friends that have worked in the Seattle area. One of them was pretty high up at Amazon, and he was telling me about the crap storm he dealt with when Amazon's like, no, you guys are actually all coming back now. Because they're like, no, we're not. Like, we're going to go find jobs that tell us that we don't have to come and work in the office unless we want to. And to the extent that we can provide that sort of flexibility, and this goes back to the role of the county commissioner too, right? Is to be able to set up these sort of personnel policies is, to the extent that we can work from home or have some sort of hybrid type approach, I think we should be doing it. And that reduces the demand on that space so we can use that space for something else. Certainly we would prefer to have most of our hearings in person, but there's a lot of places in this country who have stayed in remote hearings for almost everything. And that includes the court reporters, that includes the judge. Like, yeah, the judge goes in, but everybody else is remote. The same sort of thing can happen. We need to stop thinking about things like we're still in the 1980s and recognize that the world has changed and see how we can adapt to it and be able to be anticipating what the next change is so that we can get ahead of the curve. Like I think that's where we're missing. And government tends to not be very nimble. And that really bothers me because I don't think, especially with the commission, it's not like I've got to convince 34 other people, 35 other people in the House or 17 other people in the Senate to convince them to do something. In the commission, you really only have to convince one other person that you're right. And then the change happens. Right. Like it's incredibly, it allows for that sort of nimbleness that we don't often see in government. It can work so much faster. We say, this is the next thing. This is where we want to go. We can be proactive. We can do that. That's what we should be doing. Like, do I anticipate, just to kind of go back to your original question, like, do I think we should be having clerks working at 2:00 in the morning? Probably not. You're right. Because a lot of people don't want to be that way, but I'm also not persuaded that that's the culture of our state. And I say that because I'm a native, right? Like I understand what that saying is. There's a lot of people that aren't, who are familiar with that sort of kind of work cycle, or they're much more, the expectation is that, why can't something be open at 10:00 at night? Like, why does it have to always close at 5? Like, why can't we be more, in fact, it was one of the things that I thought about when I've been thinking about running for this office for a long time, believe it or not. And I actually had written this big, long treatise about things that I would do differently. One of them was to be able to have after hours, like people that work, like go pick up my kids, take them to soccer. Like I don't get home till almost 8:00 at night. My wife's taking care of the kids, or if I take care, she needs to come down here, go downtown or wherever to take care of something with the county government. She should be able to do it, right? Like, to the extent that we can be more accessible and create a better customer service experience for our community, we should. And if that includes better leveraging the facilities we already have, we should do that too.
Okay, a lot there.
Yep.
Question for you about, first off, when you're talking about remote work, I think remote work is one of those things that obviously it was a necessity for a short period of time when you reference Amazon workers or things like that.
Yeah.
You're predominantly talking about people that have high negotiating power, right? They're like, I'm not coming back to work on this algorithm or do whatever, because I want to hang out from home. But you're also putting the burden of having an at-home office on individuals. So if you're talking about, say, a court reporter or something, let's make the gross assumption that a court reporter is not making an incredible amount of money. Probably doesn't have a 4,000 square foot house with a dedicated soundproofed office where, he or she can listen to, the court proceedings and take reports, right? The burden of having, I think hey, we're going to have a hybrid program, or we're going to have at-home work an option, is that people might show up, people might not show up. But then if you say, okay, well, look, people only show up 50% of the time, we're going to make it so these people can't show up to work. Then you're putting the burden of maintaining an office space on that individual. And that individual likely isn't making a dump truck of money in the first place. So it's like, wait, I live in an apartment, or I know you don't like apartments, a smaller house, whatever it might be. I don't have the opportunity to actually carve out a nice quiet space. So it's actually shifting the burden of the workplace onto the individual. And that to me gets a little dicey when you start talking about, things that you're like, look, the court reporter doesn't have to show up to work. There's no reason for that person to be there, except when you take into account that court reporter may have toddlers running around their house, or a dog barking, or all these other things. Like, we go to work, we put on clean clothes, we take a shower, hopefully, and, we go off so we can engage in proper business. So even though you don't physically need to be there to hear what's going on, you also need a clear workspace.
Right. So I think it depends on the employee. First of all, it's a trade-off, right? Some people would say, like, my wife helped close an office for a large employer here, and they went to a largely remote workforce, and they got one of those kind of like rental workspaces, like joined workspaces.
Yeah.
And they didn't have enough for everybody to have a place to be all the time.
Yeah.
It was like, I think it was like 25% max of the total workforce could actually be in person at the same time. And there were people they were there every single day because of the situation you're talking about. Like, they got toddlers. And by the way, I have 2 of them, so I understand how that is. And I also have 2 large dogs that like to howl whenever ambulance goes by. So not ideal, but for some people that wouldn't want to have that situation. But there's others that are like, yeah, I'd love to be able to roll out of bed at 8:55 to start my day at 9 o'clock in the morning. Like, that would be awesome. And so I think what we're talking about is, how can we be more flexible? I mean, I guess it's kind of the same thing I keep trying to talk about. How can we be more flexible and be able to adapt? Like, okay, maybe there's an employee that never wants to work from home because they don't have the situation. They don't want to encumber those sorts of additional requirements of having a space.
Sure.
And like, okay, fine. Then you don't have to work from home. We're not saying it's mandatory. We're saying it's an option. But if there's somebody else that says, yeah, I can do my job just as well from home as I can from anywhere else, then great. Then that's what we should do. And by the way, during the pandemic, almost every county employee was working remotely. They've already done it, most of them. And so there are those that have figured out this is a style that I like. I created a little bedroom. I have my 2-bedroom apartment. One bedroom is dedicated to my office. The other is dedicated to my actual room. I've got that space. I want to continue to utilize that. Great. We should let them do that to the extent that they can perform their duties appropriately. Certainly, if you're handling things that are highly confidential, that are hard copies that need to stay in the possession of the county courthouse, there's a difference there, right? But to the extent they can do their job someplace else, I don't understand why we're limiting that sort of opportunity for people. Because if we have employees that have higher workplace or work satisfaction, they're going to have higher productivity. And if they have higher productivity, it's going to reduce the cost to the government, because the government's not going to have to rehire and retrain, and they could do better outcomes. So
Sure. And if you have higher enjoyment with your employment, then you don't have to be incentivized as much financially, right?
Right.
Like that's one of the arguments for teachers, which is they love what they're doing. And a lot of teachers would say, I'd work for free. I'm not saying they should work for free and we shouldn't pay them, but they love what they're doing. Now, if they weren't loving what they're doing, obviously that's where you get turnover and you get burnout and you have all kinds of problems, and then you have to incentivize them more appropriately.
Right.
Yeah. Man, that's a lot. It's a lot. We're covering a lot. A big sentiment from everybody has come, and you're touching on it as well, has come to hitting more efficiencies, right? Like we need to make more efficiencies within the county, within the budget. What are inefficiencies that you have seen?
So I think part of it is just, it's we don't know what we don't know, right? We haven't gone and done any of the root cause analysis, and we haven't done any of the sort of assessment that we need to be doing. And so I guess part of my background in market research and consulting is telling me that, are you familiar with Seven Sigma, Black Belt, continuous improvement? Six Sigma.
I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt.
Okay, well, it's a little different.
A little different.
Yeah, Six Sigma, lean manufacturing.
Okay. Yeah.
We haven't gone through and done that sort of analysis. To my knowledge, I could be corrected. If somebody wants to let's say, comment on one of your videos. Brandon's wrong. We did it back in 2014.
Don't comment. Nobody comment. I hate the comments. I need an actual landline in here, and we need like just let people. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We could take calls. We're not taking calls. Go.
So anyway, we haven't done that sort of lean assessment to see where we can be. And so it's hard to say like where are we at. So, but the fact that we haven't done that, every organization has a place to cut. That's just, there are places where you can reduce costs. So I think one of the first, goals for me is to get that going and just kind of do that assessment to say, where can we cut costs? Where can we find efficiencies? Where can we reduce overhead? How can we improve outcomes? Like that, we need to be more strategic about what we're doing.
Gotcha. Listen, we've talked about a dump truck of stuff today. I've really enjoyed this. Is there anything that I've missed? We've talked about the expo. Oh, here's one for you.
We haven't talked about my top priorities yet. So
okay, I'm sorry. We'll get to the if I may, one more question, then we'll hit your top priorities.
Okay.
You mentioned your dog's howl when the ambulance goes by, and it may remember one of the issues that people run into with unincorporated Ada County or unincorporated county development is emergency services, because we're polling more and more, especially the larger the geographic ranges that you're building on. And our emergency services in Idaho are not known to be like the most taken care of services or the most funded or the most, supported. Is there anything that you think that can be done about that? I mean, they don't even have you let's say you're a trucker or I'm a trucker. All right. There's a limitation to how much I can drive on a daily basis, right? If I'm driving an ambulance, there's no limit.
Yeah.
Right. Not only that, there are plenty of instances where counties have taken over EMS services and changed the work week to be like a fireman work week. So like 48 hours.
48.96. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But you're an ambulance driver, you're not a fireman, and you're certainly not being compensated as a fireman would be compensated. So it's a difficult thing. Our EMS services are the lowest on the totem pole when we think about, people that are getting the brunt of the, pain and suffering with the first responder world. But anyway, thoughts on
it? Yeah. So it's just kind of as a general idea, I prefer the idea of our EMT and EMS services going strictly through the fire agencies. I think that's where they're appropriately placed. And most firefighters have an EMT training as just a requisite, requirement to hiring. And so to the extent that we could shift those services to them instead of through like Ada County paramedics or something like that, I think that's preferable. Because if you can consolidate services that way, it allows you to be able to expand the number of services available because you're not paying as much because you're not having to employ as many people. And it's also a good place for people to kind of get a foot in the door if they want to become a firefighter, if they start working on the EMS, EMT side of things solely without being a full-fledged firefighter, they can go there and then they can step through and they're still within the same agency to move that direction. So, a lot of what we see too is we have MOUs between cities and counties too with regard to response, with regard to emergency response services, whether it be police or fire. And the sheriff does the same thing in reverse to be able to provide those sort of services in some places. So I think we just, to the extent that we can consolidate those services into one place, I think we should, because they tend to drive more efficiencies. And they also ensure that we have, we create a pool of potential candidates to move into something else and have them kind of have the background and what we're looking for so that we can train them appropriately and have them be better suited to be able to take on those other roles that might have higher responsibilities later.
So you feel that the best way to deal with, let's say, somewhat under-supported EMS services is to merge the EMS services with the existing fire departments and obviously create training pools and things of that nature, be able to identify more successful or potentially less successful fire people, and then just fund the fire departments more, fire districts.
I mean, I'm not sure it's the best way, right? You're just asking me on the question, like,
no, yeah,
there could be a better way to do this, right? I'm not going to argue that this is the best way to do it, but from my background, from having spoke with fire folks before when I was in the legislature, this is something that they've proposed. A lot of other places do it this way, where EMS and fire are the same agency. That's something that's been persuasive to me. That's a good idea.
And that'll create efficiencies that, are good for the taxpayer, but then we just fund them more so it's not two separate entities.
Right.
Gotcha.
Well, and I don't think, maybe the conservatives that are my friends and support me are going to be angry when I say this, but I think if somebody has a medical emergency, thinking about whether or not they can afford to pay for the ambulance ride to get to wherever they need to go is not something they should be thinking about. And the problem is when, ambulatory services are provided to people now, they get a bill for that. I don't know if I think that's a great idea, because I think that just because people fail to lose the genetic lottery and may have more health impacts than other, maybe it's just, it's hard for me to think that that's a good idea. I think if we're already providing services, we should continue to provide them. And again, that goes back to what I've been talking about all along. It's about priorities, right? The budget is about priorities. If that's a priority to be able to provide those care, and as you've already noted, we've got a population in large part that's aging. The need for more of those ambulatory services is going to increase, and having them be available is going to be important. And so we're paying for it regardless. We're either paying it through Medicare or through Medicaid or something. So if we could be smart about how we do it, I think we're going to be better off.
Gotcha. Okay. You made it very clear. I didn't hit you. I thought I hit important stuff, but you have priorities. Let's talk about them.
Well, I think the biggest one we missed is, I've been spending this campaign talking a lot about how we combat Biden's border crisis. And I think that's something that's not being addressed at the federal level. It's not being addressed at the state level, and the county does need to do something about it. Those two levels of government have abdicated their responsibility. And I think we absolutely need to do something about that. And that is my number one priority.
Okay. So help me understand this, because
Sure.
I actually was speaking with I had Representative Yamamoto in here recently, and she indicated, she's like, look, the number one thing people are worried about is illegal immigration.
Yep.
And at a state level, she's like, look, we can work on, like E-Verify. We can try to help employers make sure they get people on work programs or illegal immigrants or whatever it might be. What do you see as something that the county can do to combat? I presume you're talking about specifically illegal immigration.
Correct.
Right. So,
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So I think there's three pieces. There's the first one is, how we deal with violent offenders that we identify that are here illegally. Like, what do we do with them? And I know that there's an MOU between Ada County Sheriff's Office and ICE that exists. The question is if we're prioritizing that enforcement, and I don't think we are, and I think we need to be.
What is Ada County Sheriff doing if they say catch a violent criminal and realize that person's an illegal alien?
I think that it's more than just catching them in the act of something or after the fact. I think it's about actually creating a task force that's investigatory instead of just responsive, to be able to go out and find folks that might fall into that category, right?
Wait, I'm not following. So you're saying Ada County Sheriff, you're saying the focus shouldn't be on arresting somebody committing a crime and then identifying like, oh, you're an illegal alien, you just, broke into a car, right? You're saying they should be going out in the community and saying, this person, this coffee cup looks like an illegal alien, let's investigate.
No, we're not talking about profiling people. We're talking about people.
Yeah, sure. I have not looks, the wrong word. I'm not saying you're saying profile. I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
We're talking about being more intentional about how we go about our investigatory powers that we have within the sheriff's office, right? So being able to utilize the resources, again, goes back to budget priorities. Are we spending the money we should be spending to address this issue? If ICE isn't going to deport people the way they're supposed to be, and I've talked to a lot of people, again, these are all just anecdotal things that I've heard from folks, that, we aren't actually, the deportations aren't actually happening.
Wait, are you saying in Idaho, ICE is not acting appropriately?
Right.
And you're saying that's based on conversations you've had with ICE people?
With people that have had interactions with folks that they recognize they had been detained and then were not deported. So what I'm arguing, so what I'm saying is, so look at what happens in California and Florida.
No.
I'm talking
about No. Idaho.
I'm talking about policies that are happening in other states because they can be instructive for us.
No. Let's talk about what works here based on the problems we have here. Because if we start talking we are a proud but small 1.9 million population state. Right. There ain't no reason to talk about the crazy around us. Let's talk about.
I'm talking about like Florida and Texas, right? What they're able to do.
Hang on. I'm totally down to understand. I really want to understand what you're saying about, hey, look, Ada County Sheriff needs to use its investigative capacity to be more proactive with illegal immigrants. I want to know what that means.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that we need to go in, we need to identify place. So let me give you a really quick story. So I was in Cabo, Mexico, right? I was riding the municipal bus, so not the tourist bus, the bus where I was the only gringo on the bus, right? I ended up in the back of the bus, and I speak enough Spanish to be able to hold a conversation, but not well enough to understand what everything is being said.
Sure.
But I ended up sitting down. I ended up getting pushed to the back of this bus, and this was many years ago. It's probably 15 years ago, maybe a little more. And I sat down next to a guy, and this is the strangest thing. He had just come back from American Falls, which is in Idaho, Power County, and he'd been working the potato fields there.
Okay.
Right? And he pointed out he spoke fluent English. He actually had a green card, he said, which I believe him because he spoke fluent English.
Sure.
And
sure.
He's like, but he started pointing out all the guys on the bus that had come with him, and he said they were my cost for getting my green card. And I said,
they were my cost. What did he mean?
He meant that to be able to be offered the green card so he could be there legally, he had to bring other guys with him who were there illegally. So they were his ticket.
So what this guy is saying is that the ag community is complicit in encouraging illegal workforces and therefore obviously illegal immigration.
Correct. And that's, so we have in the state legislature this year, we had the representative from the Dairymen's Association say that over 2/3 of his employees are illegal in his industry. He acknowledged that in an open hearing at the state legislature.
Okay. So let's go ahead and say, all right, there's a portion of the agricultural workforce that is employed illegally, right? And Representative Hill actually brought forward, or was attempting to bring forward, an E-Verify bill that just died. Like, it just got slaughtered. Nobody was into it. Okay. So
we can do E-Verify at the county level. Okay. That would be permissible. We could do that.
Okay. So you're saying let's go to the employers and have them actually verify. So, okay. So here we go. So we're not talking about the sheriff, though. We're talking about, let's talk to employers to verify that they are in fact employing.
Well, the sheriff is the officer of the county that would be administratively responsible for that requirement.
Yeah. Okay. So, but I'm sorry, misspoke. What I'm saying is, you think the enforcement would obviously have to be the sheriff because he's going to be the one that's going to, go out and make it all happen. But what you're saying is go to the employer base and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. On a county level, we're going to have this E-Verify program. We're going to track electronically who's here, what the paperwork is, where your money's going, things like that. And then you're going to have to verify, you, the employer, that you are not employing illegally, stationed workers.
Yep.
Okay.
That's part of it. That's one part. There's also this investigative part about identifying folks that are here illegally.
Okay. So how does that work?
So that's part of this issue of being able to say, when you find groups of people, how do you start to look into behavior patterns, right? We can look at through tracing a phone number, cell phones, and the pinging off of towers, that sort of stuff. We're talking about the sort of things that actually the NSA, the FBI, the FSA, they all do right now to kind of spy on Americans. Like,
wait, you want Ada County Sheriff to start employing those tactics?
No, but what I'm saying is we can, once we identify people who are here illegally because they don't have constitutional rights if they're here illegally. That is
100%. Keep going.
So
I'm with you.
What I'm saying, it's different. If you're an American citizen, you have rights to privacy. If you're not, you don't.
I got you.
So what I'm saying is we should be utilizing those things for people that we recognize. So if we're using these kind of programs and we identify people who are here illegally through these different employers, for example, well, then we can start identifying, are they participating in illicit activity? Can we start to figure out, because we can figure out who people are. There's data that tells us how to model these sorts of things. But we're just not spending the money to do it. The other piece is, like other places.
Just to make sure I get, and we will come right back. Okay. So say we have, like me, I'm an illegal immigrant. I'm working for a dairy. Okay. The Ada County Sheriff, using its investigative tools, realizes, okay, Matt is here illegally. Instead of arresting me and deporting me instantaneously, they say, let's watch him, because Matt doesn't have constitutional rights. We're on the same page here. So I bumble on back to my apartment and I engage in activities with individuals. You guys are watching me this whole time because you want to know who I'm associated with. Yeah.
It's the same thing we did after 9/11 with folks with certain people that were potentially more likely to cause
Yeah.
terrorist
No,
actions.
I'm with you. So then you essentially track me and figure out like, okay, first off, is Matt committing crimes or is he hanging out with people that are committing crimes? And at that point, you essentially grab, whenever you come to the point where you're like, okay, we've had enough of Matt. He gets out, he gets deported, and we have enough to deport the other people that were criminals amongst him.
So I'm not even so much worried about deporting Matt.
Oh,
I'm more
we leave Matt working at the dairy.
I mean, look, it's foolhardy to suggest we can deport every person here that's illegal. That we can't do it. It's too big of a problem. So again, we have to identify the real threat. Right? That's where I'm talking about, is then utilizing those relationships that create to lead us to other people who are actually causing the problems. Because if Matt connects with the drug dealer because he's getting his hit of whatever his drug of choice is, he's probably working with somebody that's within his community who is probably also here illegally. Now we're found to somebody. Now we can be proactive about that and use our investigative powers so we can start. I see a web. It's a web. It's exactly what it is.
I'm seeing. So essentially, your idea is we use E-Verify initially to track individuals, not necessarily deport them, but use them to find the hubs of drugs or human trafficking or things of that nature.
Yeah.
And it starts at the employment base where it's like, okay, we can easily snag people or at least identify people who are working illegally. And then we assume that they have a higher propensity towards crime and we follow the trail.
Right.
Wow, man. Do we have the funds for that? Like it sounds like having a web and treating, I mean, there are a lot of things here, but like how much would that cost?
Well, I think
what kind of resources?
That's what we're talking. So that goes back to what we've been talking about this whole time. How do we cut costs here so we can shift funds here?
To catch Matt in the web.
Right. Because this is a priority issue for people, right? This is what's salient. And even if it wasn't salient, it's something we should be doing anyways, by the way, because we need to, if we're not a nation of laws, we're a nation of chaos. So like we have to be able to enforce our borders. That's number one. But if we can leverage other stuff over here to reduce costs and then shift more resources over here to be able to improve things, that's awesome.
Okay,
right?
so the priority for you isn't necessarily even enforcing the borders. It's leveraging the bad nature of criminals to get other criminals. But it's not like you want to keep Matt out. You're like, hey, look, let Matt be here.
I mean, I think that's a decision that the community has to make, right? Ultimately, I don't want to be the judge of that decision. I think if the community says, yeah, we want to deport every person that's here illegally, I think, okay, we can have that discussion as to whether or not that's the proper thing for us to be doing.
Well, what would you do? As does a commissioner have any sway over how
they do? They actually have some judicial, but it's not within this sphere, right? Like that goes to immigration courts. That's other stuff.
Sure.
But we can actually utilize, and I'm going to acknowledge a lack of knowledge here.
Sure.
But
that makes two of us, by the way.
I know that there are programs that are being utilized other places where if ICE is not providing deportation in a timely fashion, that those other jurisdictions, because I'm not going to use other words for other states, so I'm going to work around it.
God bless you. There are better programs elsewhere,
and they're utilizing those to then charge the federal government for providing a service that this federal government is statutorily required to provide, and is refusing to provide, and we're going to provide it for them and charge them our cost to be able to do that.
Can't we just send them to Martha's Vineyard? That was such a gangster play.
That really was. I would actually send them. If it weren't, I'd send them all to Disneyland. And then
I used to love Disneyland.
Yeah, it's awful now. We were there in December. It was so bad.
You know what? And this is the other thing. Disneyland has become so astronomically expensive. Like it's actually offensive. You're like, how? Like how? What are you talking about? We took our kids there when they were really young, and I mean, really young. I'm talking like. I got a 12-year-old now. He was there before he was 1. And we were there, for a big family thing, extended family, the whole thing. So over 10 years ago, like it really was like, it was fine. Like, yeah, LA's always been kind of sketchy, but we were talking like 2012, 2013, things weren't crazy. Now, get the hell out.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Get the hell out. I actually, this is not as funny as I think it is, but I think it's hilarious. I was doing a Eagle Chamber check-in with this gal over at Eagle Chamber of Commerce, Brandy Furiani. She's fantastic. And we do like a weekly or bi-weekly show showcasing different businesses. Check it out if you're in the area. But she and I brought up Disney because we both now we're like, oh, it's guaranteed you can't watch Disney shows anymore. Like anything outside of Star Wars, and even Star Wars is sketchy.
Yeah.
Anything outside of Star Wars, it's like a hard pass. And I made this terrible joke. I was like, who do you think the first trans Disney princess is going to be? And like, what's her backstory? Because you know it's coming.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's coming eventually.
Well, they had this, I saw this clip on YouTube or this gal, she was the creative director for Disney Animation, and she was this lesbian gal. She's like, yeah, anytime I could put in some sort of gay like stuff in any kind of content we were creating, I was putting it in there. So I was watching like Buzz Lightyear with my kids, and I'm just like, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, seriously? Was my kids, because my little boys were just like, what does that mean she's got a wife? I'm like,
don't worry about it, son.
I'm like, it means that watch the show. Buzz Lightyear's cool.
Yeah, and like
it was weird. I'm like, why do we? I said, okay, that felt really forced. Like, why do we need?
Right. And I don't listen. I am all for people living how they want to live.
Sure.
I don't appreciate Disney preaching to us or taking it into their hands that they're gonna, steer culture and force the conversation. Because it's like my kids like Buzz Lightyear. We have the Buzz Lightyear and Woody toys and the whole thing. And it's like, I didn't let him watch Lightyear just because, like, look, I get to have that conversation with them first. I get to introduce this, and perhaps they're exposed to it in the world, and at that point, fine. Yeah. But I need Disney to like teach morality, like The Lion King. Like, I don't need Disney for this. Like, I need Disney for Little Mermaid and like redeeming your father's mistakes and Moana. I don't need this. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So immigration is one of your priorities. What's next?
But the other was, we've already talked about the other. The second big one is this property tax piece where, cutting the actual size of government, like the literal size of government, because if we just continue to cut around the edges, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to change the structural size to be able to reduce property taxes in the long run. And then of course, this whole piece around community safety is the third piece. And we've already talked about that. And that ties into this immigration stuff too. How do we better leverage, networks to be able to identify criminal activity? So we can improve our law enforcement capacity in our community.
Great. Listen, I like your priorities. Safer communities. Yeah. I will note, though, one thing you said right at the beginning, I just remembered it. The influx of out of state, it's my understanding, per Phil McGrain, Secretary of State's site, is that Idaho has become more red, not less red.
Correct.
So the sentiment that it's like, oh, immigrants or refugees, as you called me, like you, Matt, are, turning this place less red.
It's not. No. I would never argue that.
Oh,
the best.
Well, wait, I must have misunderstood. Help me.
Well, maybe I misspoke. That's possible. I do that sometimes. No, the folks that are coming here from out of state are awesome. Like I
appreciate you too.
I love that they are coming here and they recognize the existential threat that this state and this country are in, because they've left places that became crap holes, and they see the state of Idaho going down the same path, and they're saying, hold on, pull the brake. Yeah, right. Because, and the people here, they're like the frog in the boiling water. Like, what do you mean? It's always been this temperature. No, it hasn't. It's hot now. Knock it off. And I really appreciate the wisdom that comes from people who have a lived experience that tells us, you're going down the same path we did. Please don't let it happen again. We don't want to have to move our family. Like, I have talked to some of my best friends now are people that have come from California and Washington. And because they're just like, they cared enough about their families to uproot their entire lives and leave grandparents and leave all this other stuff, because they wanted to make sure their kids had a place to be raised that was reflective of their values. And I think, again, multi-generational family in Idaho, I get the deep root piece, but sometimes you need people from the outside telling you when you're not doing something right, or when there's something, ahead. And I think the fact that they've been to the end of the railroad track and they know where it goes, it's like in the Back to the Future 2, where they go over the, about like that whole scene, like you've seen the end of it, the bridge isn't completed yet. Let's stop the train. I appreciate that there are folks that have come from other states that provide us that insight and that wisdom, so that we can correct our behavior before it's too late. Because, again, I don't want to leave. Like, I love Idaho. In fact, I was driving my boys this morning, and I was looking over the vista towards the foothills, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful here. It's great. Like, I was down at the, that's why I was a little late. I was down at the procession for the deputy, and they had this, it looked like a 2-story flag up on a fire truck. And
Yeah, just the backdrop of the mountains and then seeing the procession. It was like 45 minutes I was standing out there with my wife. And
Yeah.
I was not sad to be there for a second. You know, I was a little late getting to you and you got stuck in traffic coming this way. But, you know, the sentiment that this state has, I was driving home with my wife and I was like, you know, I know that people get very anxious about the country and like, oh, we're losing everything. And just watching that display of support for the law enforcement. And, you know, we counted something like 5 different states had representatives there, you know, and many from Northern California were right around where I grew up. In fact, my hometown had a couple patrol cars there. And just, again, I don't think the American dream is gone. I don't think American culture is gone. I think it is something we have to defend and we have to identify and we have to stop to the extent we can bad actors, you know, coming into our heads through social media and whatnot and painting a horrible picture and fomenting insurrection in a real way.
Right.
Yeah, but it's so great here.
The cost of liberty is eternal vigilance, right? That's what we have to have. But we also have to be recognized that we have what we have right now is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's a real blessing that the Lord would give it to us. But at the same time, it's not a guarantee. Like, if we don't continue to fight for it, we will lose it. Right. So, you know, just praying for that family too, that deputy, that's just such a tragic situation. Our church has a little break room because we're not unincorporated county, and they come and visit our break room and they have snacks and stuff. There's kind of their little hideout that they get to come to during their shifts. And just, I know that our church was really impacted too, because we had those guys. I think the deputy in particular is regularly at our church to do that stuff. But the fact that we've got a kind of community that would rally around that sort of situation in such a positive way, I think it really speaks to the character of our community. Yeah. And I think that's worth fighting for. And if you really think about, you know, why do I run for this office? Because I want to make sure that we continue to be a community that's worth fighting for that sort of stuff. And we have the kind of sort of community that wants to. So,
well, listen, I appreciate you. I have really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
Win, lose, or draw, I appreciate you running. You know, we need people to stand up. We need diversity of thought. We need people pushing on all kinds of things so we get the best, most robust policies and actions. And so, again, whether or not you win, I appreciate you. Thank you for what you're doing for the county.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate your time.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.